The ancient Greeks were prolific inventors, but one of the most mysterious Greek inventions has to be the mobile automaton, a programmable device that resembles a modern robot. In this video, I'm going to use the designs left by an ancient Greek automaton inventor to reproduce a functional replica of one of these ancient devices. Specifically, I'm going to be building Hero's automaton. Hero was an ancient Greek inventor who lived around 2,000 years ago in the city of Alexandria in Egypt. His book, Hero's Automata, is one of the few remaining accounts of these ancient Greek devices, and the only one which goes into the nitty-gritty of how they actually work. The word automaton is Greek for that which moves or thinks for itself, and as such, Hero's device is meant not only to move by its own power, but to also automatically steer itself wherever it's supposed to go. Recently, a modern translation of Hero's Automata was released by Dr. Francisco Grillo at the University of Glasgow. It's freely available to all as a PDF, which I'll leave a link to in the description. It's a phenomenal source, and this project wouldn't be possible without it. The automaton Hero describes is essentially a large hourglass with wheels. This may sound strange, but I promise it will all make sense as we go along. To build the tall pillars to hold up my hourglass, I'm going to need a long piece of wood. I didn't have any of suitable length on hand, so I went and found a piece that seemed long enough to me. Hero tells us to build our automaton out of light wood. Luckily, this tree, along with the log I made the planks from, is paulownia wood, and is one of the lightest and fastest growing woods on Earth. This sizable trunk is only 2 years old. The stump I left behind will likely regrow into a nearly identical tree in 2 years' time. This has already happened once, and the wood I used in my ancient forge video is from the same tree harvested 2 years ago. Hero, despite being the inventor of a great many things, did not invent the first automaton, and tells us in his book that automata making is an old tradition in Greece. However, he doesn't specify how old, so it's hard to say for sure when these devices were actually first invented. That said, mentions of things that sound like automata pop up all throughout Greek history. These whispers of automata come in many forms, some clearly mythical, others real-life accounts of actual devices, and some that are hard to say for sure. The earliest reference in Greek culture to automata is in Homer's epic of the Illiad, dating back to the 8th century BC, nearly 3,000 years ago. In the story, the craftsman god Hephaestus is tasked with making arms and armor for Achilles. When we meet Hephaestus in his workshop on Olympus, he's found building automata Homer calls tripods. These wheeled devices are meant to serve and carry food to the gods of Olympus. While these tripods are clearly fictional, it's likely this story was a major source of inspiration to craftspeople all throughout ancient Greece, and I can't help but notice, while reading Hero's design description, the similarities to Hephaestus's tripods. One obvious similarity between the two are the wheels. Hero's automaton rolls around Alexandria, just as Hephaestus's tripods roll around Olympus. Hero doesn't say exactly how large to make the wheels, so I sized mine such that one rotation of the wheel translates to a 90-degree turn of the base. This has to do with how the device is controlled, and we'll come back later. As for the axles, I'm going to use 2 sizes of scrap copper tubing for every joint in the project, one which fits into the other. Hero describes his joints as turned on a lathe to a close fit, oiled with olive oil, and made of bronze or iron. The copper should be close enough to bronze for my purposes. The two spun easily together, but the fit was a little loose, which worried me. But I decided to move on and see what it was like with the rest of the wheel assembly. Hero's automaton is powered by a falling weight attached to thread. To keep the weight from crashing to the ground and violently destroying the automaton, the heavy weight is placed inside of an hourglass, resting on the sand. As the sands pour out, the weight descends and pulls the thread with it. The thread can be wound around various mechanisms so that they move as the weight descends. To move the wheels, the strings are wound around wood bobbins fixed to each wheel. As the weight pulls the string, the bobbins are unwound, rolling the wheels. The direction the string is wound around the bobbin determines the direction the wheel rolls. One of the most ingenious parts of the automaton are these pegs in the bobbin that act as an anchor point to loop the string around, so you can wind the string back and forth, or in whatever way you please, rather than only in one direction. This will come back later when it comes time to program the automaton to steer itself. After assembling the wheels, I was still worried about the loose, rattly fit of the axle, and decided to address it by making some small copper bushings from copper wire I hammered flat. After brazing the bushings in place with the archaic blowtorch, the wheels move much smoother. I'm going to repeat this bushing process for every joint in the build. Some components of the automaton will require flat bar stock. To make this, I'm just going to flatten out lengths of the scrap copper pipe, a useful trick a very resourceful coppersmith taught me. Automata pop up elsewhere in Greek mythology. While Hephaestus, a literal god, seems to have some divine ability to imbue his creations with life, the mythical inventor Daedalus is presented as just an ordinary mortal man, a legendary human craftsperson that built things real Greek craftspeople could strive to compete with. You probably know Daedalus from the story of Icarus, the boy who flew too close to the sun. Daedalus is Icarus's father and is the craftsman who made his wings. According to Plato, in his book the Meno, there are old Greek myths involving Daedalus's amazing ability to create statues that could move on their own. Apparently, the mythical inventor had to tie them up for safekeeping, as if he didn't, they would leave their pedestals on their own accord and wander away. Who knows, perhaps some of Daedalus's lost statues are still wandering around today. Suggesting that real Greek craftspeople believed they could build what Daedalus did may seem like a stretch, being that Daedalus is supposed to have built flying machines after all. However, this brings us to one of the first recorded instances of a real physical automaton in Greek history. This early automaton is unique, as instead of rolling or walking, it supposedly flew. Archytas, a philosopher of the Pythagorean school who lived in the late 5th to early 4th century BC, is attributed by a later Roman author, Aulus Gellius, to have devised a mechanical dove made of wood and balanced with weights that, according to Gellius, was moved by a current of air hidden within it. A variety of pneumatic inventions are known to have existed in ancient Greece, so it's possible the supposed hidden current of air Gellius refers to is a compressed air tank or a small kettle pressurized by steam. However, as Dr. Grillo points out in his paper, it's hard to say for sure, as those technologies don't appear again until substantially later in Greek history. Because my automaton won't be able to fly, I'm going to need more than 2 wheels for it to stand upright. After completing the drive wheels, I'm going to work on the 3rd wheel Hero says to build. Unlike the drive wheels that are fixed in place, this wheel will need to turn on an axis, just like the modern caster wheels on spinny chairs. Hero describes this as a wheel that turns on an axle with a frame that turns on its own axle. I'm not certain, but I think this may be the oldest description of a caster wheel in human history. As you can see, brazing these pieces together has caused quite a lot of oxidation to build up on the surface, so I decided to clean up my parts in a bath of ascorbic acid. This may seem like a modern technique, and certainly Greek craftspeople wouldn't have had pure ascorbic acid on hand. But ancient metalworkers were actually adept with chemically altering the surface of a metal, and existent ancient documents, like the Leiden Papyrus X, contain numerous recipes for cleaning and altering a metal finish to make it look just about any way the craftsperson could want. After dissolving away the oxides in ascorbic acid, I polished the parts on leather with a little abrasive compound. Another mention of real automata in Greek history comes from Aristotle himself. The famous philosopher mentions automata multiple times in his writings, notably in his book De Motu Animalium, or On the Motion of Animals. This book seeks to investigate why animals move, and he uses automata as a parallel to life. He compares the muscular sinew of animals to the tensioned cords of automata. This metaphor is significant in understanding the role of automata in Greece, as that Aristotle would write this means that not only was he familiar with automata, but that they would have needed to be a common enough sight for him to assume his audience would know them as well, and not only that, but have at least a passing understanding of how they work for the metaphor to be informative. Hero's book doesn't go into much detail of how to actually join parts, so I'm going to try to use construction techniques that are evidenced in existent Greek artifacts. For example, I'll join metal pieces using these tapered copper pins I made from wire. Immediately after assembling the wheels, I noticed a problem. Despite being able to move freely, the caster wheels don't turn with the base, and seem to get stuck. After a little head scratching, it occurred to me that for caster wheels to work, the wheel has to be offset from the axis of rotation. So I'm going to need to remake my caster wheel brackets to accommodate this. Hero doesn't seem to mention this problem in his book, so I don't know if it's expected a craftsperson would know how to make a caster wheel, or if there's something I'm just missing. These new brackets will have to be worked a lot more than the other metal pieces I've made so far, so I'm going to anneal them in my charcoal furnace. Annealing is the process of heating metal to relieve internal stresses in its molecular structure. Once allowed to cool, this will make the copper much more supple and easy to work with. As we move past Aristotle in the historical record, we get to one of the more vague, but also my personal favorite accounts of ancient automata. Admittedly, this story keeps me up at night sometimes. It's a strange one, so bear with me here. It takes place in Athens during the Dionysia festival in 308 or 309 BC. The archon, or leader of Athens, Demetrios, was leading a parade procession that moved through Athens during the festival. With him was a giant automaton snail. Apparently, this large snail spat slime as it moved, potentially indicating the presence of some sort of internal hydraulic mechanism. However, it's completely unknown, and there's little way of knowing what powered it or what it was capable of. When trying to look more into this, I ran dry of scholarly sources pretty fast. I couldn't find much more than speculation about how the snail was supposed to work. Broadening the net, it seems some strange part of the internet is obsessed with the historical meaning of snails, and when trying to figure out why Demetrios would have such a thing built, I was inundated with random, baseless, and conflicting information about snails and their prevalence in history. That said, I do find it interesting that dozens of medieval European manuscripts are decorated with giant snails defeating knights in battle. I don't know what this means, but I'm going to continue to look into it. With the new caster wheels finished and working great, the base is nearing completion, and I just need to make a place for the thread that attaches to the weight to pass through the base plate so it can be strung around the wheels. This interface will have a copper insert. To make thin copper plate, I just split the scrap pipe and hammered it flat. Only a few decades after the robot snail is said to have marched on Athens, the inventor Ctesibius is born. Ctesibius was very possibly the first head of the Museum of Alexandria, which contained the famous Great Library of Alexandria. Ctesibius was a gifted inventor, and is credited with many revolutionary devices, including the Greek hydraulis, which was the world's first pipe organ, and importantly, he developed a sophisticated kind of water clock. Ctesibius was certainly an automaton maker, and likely wrote books on the subject. Unfortunately, his book on automaton making was lost, as the Roman author and architect Vitruvius, who copied the majority of the remaining works of Ctesibius, intentionally left out his work on automata. Vitruvius was mainly interested in what he deemed to be useful, and believed that since the automata were built mostly for fun, that they were unnecessary, and didn't bother to write on them. It seems likely that Hero's automaton is most closely developed off of Ctesibius's earlier automatons, as much of Hero's other work draws directly from his fellow Alexandrian inventor. Crucial to the function of Hero's automaton is the device I've been calling an hourglass. We don't know when automata first started including hourglass-like devices in their design, but being that Ctesibius's work was so intrinsically linked with timekeeping, I wouldn't be surprised if he was the origin of this mechanism. I'm going to be building my hourglass out of plate glass, as I think it will help to show how the mechanism works. That said, I should specify that Hero says to make this part out of wood. Clear glass didn't exist in Hero's time, though colored glass vessels were becoming more and more popular. I've never worked with glass before, so this is entirely an experiment, and I'm probably doing it all wrong. That said, it was a fun experience, and I want to do more. The hourglass mechanism is the heart of Hero's automaton, and controls the release of energy into the device by slowing the fall of the weight. This simple device performs the same role as the pendulum escapements in the mechanical clocks that wouldn't be invented for around another millennia and a half. The fact that the ancient Greeks had the ability to regulate energy in this way opens up worlds of possibilities in the automatic devices they could have created. Moving on now to the top part of the mechanism, I'm going to make the hooks that will hold up the hourglass. These kinds of hourglass-controlled mechanisms really spark my curiosity. It's a lot like clockwork, but instead of clocks, it's an hourglass. I don't know what to call this. Hourglass work? Sand work? Whatever it is, it's cool. And I love imagining ancient craftspeople bringing hourglasses to life in their workshops just for the fun of it. It's a very different view of these ancient people than I'm used to seeing. Not just the fact that these devices existed, but their attitudes and creativity towards how they created these devices interests me deeply. The top plate of the mechanism will also hold a number of pulleys. These are necessary to redirect the string that will be attached to the weight down to the wheels at the base of the mechanism. My weight will have 2 strings attached, one for each wheel. However, Hero's full automaton would have had many strings, as beyond just moving, his automaton was designed to perform an elaborate display of functions, all controlled by the same weight and hourglass. Believe it or not, among other things, Hero's automaton had a built-in wine fountain, an array of dancing statues to amaze onlookers, and even a small flaming brazier that would be automatically lit by a concealed oil lamp inside the device. Hero meant to astound people with a somewhat over-the-top display. Though he clearly wanted to amaze people, and even calls automaton makers wonder workers in his book, it's clear he doesn't want onlookers to know how the devices work, and conceals the majority of the mechanisms behind cosmetic paneling. I think perhaps, by keeping its operating principles a secret, Hero is intending to draw a correlation between his devices and the god Hephaestus' own automata. Just as the tripods of Olympus seem to move through some inexplicable divine power, Hero wants to suggest a similar inexplicable power at work in his devices. Clearly, if this is the case, then this is mostly just for the effect on the audience, as if he just wanted people to think he had godlike powers in general, he wouldn't have written a book that explains all the secrets thoroughly. Perhaps he thought if people could see the simplicity with which the mechanism is able to act, they wouldn't be as amazed. This is one place Hero and I disagree, and as I finish up the framing for the automaton by making the wedges to hold the whole thing together, I'm going to leave the entirety of the mechanism exposed. I think in our modern context, the simplicity with which the device moves and the ingenuity of its ancient inventors will be more amazing than if I were to try to convince you I have some sort of divine power. I'd still like the device to be presentable though, so now that it's nearly completed, I'm going to stain the wood with a fresh batch of black walnut stain. We're closing in on being able to give the automaton a test run. I just need two more critical components: a pot to catch the sand that falls from the hourglass, and most importantly, the weight that will power the device. I decided to make the pot that will catch the sand from the hourglass out of wild clay. If you've been following my channel for a while, you know I like to experiment with this, and this pot is using an updated clay recipe I'm still tweaking. I'm sizing this pot using some paper cutouts I made based on what I calculated its volume would need to be. Unfortunately, I'm horrible at math and made it too small. It'll still work fine, but the automaton's range will be limited. My pot isn't a particularly Greek design, as I'm modeling it off of Bronze Age bell beaker urns from Northern Europe. I went this way because I just sort of like these designs, and I'm not yet really experienced enough to pull off the elaborate pottery designs the Greeks are famous for. Though to make it feel a little more Greek, I decided to inscribe the pot with a few lines taken from an ancient Greek hymn to Hephaestus. The hymn asks for the maker god's help with crafting. Hopefully he's out there somewhere, because I think I'll need it to get this thing to work. Throughout this video, I've been saying the hourglass uses sand. However, Hero says his mobile automatons used lighter alternatives to sand to save weight, specifically plant seeds. So to be precise, I'm going to be filling my hourglass with thistle seed. With the pot fired to terracotta in my primitive pit kiln, it's time to move on to making the weight. I'm starting with the hook, which the strings will be fixed to with copper rings. Hero tells us this weight should be lead, and that its weight should be greater than the whole rest of the automaton combined. Because my automaton clocks in a little under 5 pounds, I decided to cast 7 pounds of lead into a weight. I made a plaster mold and preheated it to drive off moisture. The casting worked, but my mold bubbled, making it clear my technique had big problems. I wasn't too worried though, as I was wearing adequate PPE. With molten metal, it's essential, not only on your skin to protect from the metal, but also a respirator for your lungs. Even metals we don't think of as being as toxic as lead, such as brass, can hurt you if you breathe in the oxide fumes released by the molten metal. Finally, it's time to test the automaton. After quite a while of working, I was nervously eager to see if my automaton would actually work at all.
Well, almost.
Evidently, things didn't quite go to plan. It's clear the massive weight swinging freely in the automaton will pull the automaton over pretty easily, so I quickly made a removable bracket to trap the hourglass in place between the pillars to keep it from swinging. This prevented the automaton from tipping, but testing it again, it was clear it had more problems. All in all, I ended up doing 16 unsuccessful test runs, going back and trying my best to correct every mistake I'd made. Eventually, I remade the wheels with a hole saw, to try to get them a little more perfectly circular. This helped a lot, and finally the automaton was actually able to move. It wasn't very smooth, it was dreadfully slow, and there were clearly problems to fix, but it was encouraging enough to keep me going. It was clear, despite the robot not falling over, that the tipping was still causing problems. As it rocked back and forth, some wheels would leave the ground and spin freely, while others would dig in and be slowed dramatically. To address this instability, I decided to extend the distance between the front and back caster wheels, hoping this would make the automaton more stable on its wheels. While still slow, this made the automaton work much smoother, and I was finally confident enough to program it to do more than just straight paths. I also found a 1-liter glass beaker worked great as a temporary replacement for my small pot, extending the automaton's range. The low speed is due in combination to the small wheel size, as well as the small aperture of the hourglass. Neither of these things Hero specifies dimensions for. But the last part of his book is all about ways to speed the robot up and extend its range. For my first programmed path, I wound the bobbins to turn the automaton left for one winding, about a 90-degree turn, and then proceed straight. It did exactly what I wanted it to. Even though I know exactly how it did this, seeing the automaton make a turn still caught me off guard, and felt a little like the thing had a mind of its own. The robot still jitters a bit as it moves. I think if I widened the aperture of the hourglass, the faster descent rate of the weight would increase the automaton's speed, but also with its higher momentum would probably make it drive a little smoother. I really enjoyed this project, and I'd like to continue to experiment with automata. This isn't actually the only automaton Hero writes about, and he mentions another variation with a different power source I'd like to try to build sometime. Though how soon that will be will depend on the response to this video. I'm going to end this video here. If you enjoyed, please subscribe, and if you feel like it, sharing it with your friends who might be interested would be a huge help to me. If you have any ideas, questions, or advice, please comment, as I'm always looking to improve. Thanks for watching, and bye!